Hello, friend, and welcome back to the quiet little corner of the internet, where we let curiosity drift like smoke in the evening air. This is The Lazy Scientist, a space for winding down, for letting the chaos of the day ease into the background, while your mind takes a slow walk through something strange, something ancient, something that reminds us how endlessly inventive the natural world can be. If you're tuning in tonight, thank you for being here. I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Whether you're curled up in bed, pacing slowly with a cup of tea, or lying on the couch with the lights low, this time is yours. And if you find these late-night wanderings into science and wonder soothing, leaving a like or subscribing is the simplest way to keep this small community alive. For those of you who already have, I owe you my gratitude. You are the reason I get to share these stories, and together we create a little sanctuary of curiosity at the edge of sleep. Now, I can't promise this story will lull you into dreams, but if it keeps you awake, at least it will be in the company of some of the strangest beings ever to walk our planet. And really, if one must lose a few minutes of rest, what better excuse than wandering through the twilight world of dinosaurs? So here's a question to set the stage. What makes a dinosaur strange? Is it a neck that stretches so far skyward it feels like a bridge to the clouds? Is it a skull thickened into a living battering ram? Or perhaps it's a pair of claws, so long and curved they look like they were forged for a nightmare, when in truth they belong to an animal with no taste for flesh at all. Tonight we're going to explore three such creatures. They are not the household names like Tyrannosaurus or Triceratops. These are the oddities, the misfits of evolution's grand experiment, the ones that almost seem too improbable to have been real. And yet they were. Dinosaurs are strange in another way too. They are impossibly ancient, inhabiting a world that feels more like myth than memory, and yet they remain oddly familiar. Their bones stand in museums, their shapes fill our films, and in birds, they still circle the skies above our cities. They live in our imagination as monsters, as giants, as long-lost rulers of Earth. But when you peer closely at the details, at the necks, the domes, the claws, you discover a truth that is stranger than fiction. These were not creatures invented for spectacle. They were animals shaped by pressures of hunger, danger, climate, and chance. Evolution sculpted them into forms that still baffle us today, not for beauty or terror, but because in their time, in their place, these oddities worked. Strangeness in nature is not a mistake. It is survival wearing an unfamiliar mask. And so, with that in mind, let's step gently into the forests of the past. The light grows dim, the air thick with humidity, the ground vibrating under the slow tread of giants. In the distance, a groan echoes, deep, deliberate, and heavy as a collapsing tree. You pause, hold your breath, and then the figure emerges from the green. At first, all you see is shadow. Then comes the outline, a body vast as a house, legs thick as columns, a tail swinging behind like a pendulum. But it is not the bulk that steals your breath. It is the neck. A neck so impossibly long, you can scarcely believe it is real, rising through the canopy, stretching outward like some living bridge between earth and sky. This is Mamenchisaurus, one of evolution's most daring designs. Its body was long, over 70 feet from nose to tail, but more than 30 feet of that was neck alone. Imagine a creature that could stand in one clearing and feed from the branches of another, without ever moving its feet. Its neck was not just long, it was engineered for the task. Each vertebra was stretched like a spool, hollowed out with delicate air sacs that lightened the load. Without that, the weight of such an organ would have been impossible to lift. Birds use the same trick today, filling their bones with air to keep them light yet strong. And so, millions of years before the first feathered wings beat the sky, dinosaurs like Mamenchisaurus were already playing with the blueprint of lightness. What did it do with this tremendous reach? The simplest answer is feeding. The forests of the Jurassic teemed with conifers and cycads, leaves high out of reach for most animals. But Mamenchisaurus could sweep its head like a giant scythe, stripping branches with peg-shaped teeth that were designed not for chewing, but for raking foliage into its mouth. Food disappeared down its gullet, mostly unbroken, the real work left to the vast fermenting chambers of its gut. In this way, the animal became a living recycling system, turning whole branches into energy to fuel its lumbering frame. But some scientists believe there was more to it than just eating. A neck like that may have been a display, an elegant living banner of strength. Imagine a herd of these creatures at dusk, their necks rising and swaying, crossing over one another like the masts of ships in harbor. Perhaps the longest necks belonged to the males, a silent contest of size and grace. Perhaps a gentle arc of movement signaled dominance or courtship. In paleontology, one feature often serves many masters: survival, attraction, efficiency, defense. The truth may be a tangle of all of them. Of course, the neck also came with problems. How do you pump blood 30 feet skyward to a brain? How do you keep it from fainting every time it bends to drink? These are questions we still puzzle over. Maybe it had a heart the size of a bathtub, maybe valves in the arteries like locks in a canal. Whatever the solution, it worked, for this lineage thrived across millions of years. Life for Mamenchisaurus was probably unhurried. It moved with the slow inevitability of an elephant, leaving the earth trembling in its path. Its size was protection in itself. Though predators like Allosaurus would have prowled nearby, ever watchful for the young or the weak, safety likely lay in numbers. Picture a line of these sauropods moving together across a floodplain, their necks rising and falling like the rhythm of the sea. It must have been a sight both majestic and unreal, as though the landscape itself had grown legs and begun to walk. Mamenchisaurus was strange, not because it had spikes or horns or armor, but because it took one idea, make the neck longer, and pushed it farther than any other creature has dared. Bold, audacious, and successful, it turned absurdity into survival. Even now, imagining its silhouette swaying above the trees, you cannot help but marvel at the creativity of evolution, which sometimes finds its most brilliant designs by following a single thought to its extreme. Now, let's shift the scene forward in time. The Jurassic giants fade into memory, and the world of the late Cretaceous comes alive. Flowering plants begin to spread across the land, painting the landscape with new colors. Herds of herbivorous dinosaurs graze in the warm sun, their bodies casting long shadows across meadows of ferns and early blooms. At first glance, one particular creature doesn't seem so unusual. It is bipedal, about the length of a small car, walking with a stiff tail for balance, a beaked mouth for cropping plants, and strong hind legs ready to spring into motion. But then you notice its head. The top of the skull rises into a thick, rounded dome of solid bone, gleaming faintly in the sunlight like a helmet. This is Pachycephalosaurus, one of evolution's strangest experiments, and that dome is its defining feature. The roof of its skull could be more than 10 inches thick, arched and dense, capped with a scatter of knobs and short spikes that gave it a slightly medieval look. Imagine an animal that walked through its world with a built-in battering ram on its head. For decades, paleontologists argued about what this dome was for. The most dramatic image, and the one that captured public imagination, was combat. Two pachycephalosaurs facing each other and then charging forward, skull meeting skull in a thunderous clash. It is easy to picture, because we see echoes of it today in animals like bighorn sheep. Their headbutts reverberate across mountainsides, tests of strength and stamina. Was this Cretaceous dome-headed dinosaur doing the same? Maybe, but the truth is less certain. When scientists studied the biomechanics of Pachycephalosaurus skulls, they noticed that while the bone was thick, the shape of the skull and the way the neck attached might not have been ideal for repeated, violent impacts. High-speed collisions could have been risky, potentially damaging the brain or spine. This has led to other theories. Perhaps they didn't collide head-on at full speed, but instead used their domes for flank butting, slamming into the sides of rivals. This would still demonstrate strength without the same catastrophic risks. Another idea is that the dome was primarily about display. Like antlers in deer or plumage in birds, the size and shape of the dome could have been a visual signal. The bigger and more pronounced the dome, the stronger and healthier the individual. The little knobs and spikes around the edges might have been covered with bright skin in life, flashing colors to attract mates or warn competitors. Imagine a herd of pachycephalosaurs on an open plain, the afternoon sun glinting off domes that ranged from modest bumps to massive gleaming helmets. It would have been a living contest of architecture, a parade of bone and color. Evidence supports both views. Some fossil domes show signs of injury and healing, scars of impacts that were survived. These suggest they did collide, at least sometimes. Perhaps the dome had a dual role, part weapon, part display. Maybe it was like antlers, which are used both to fight and to signal status, even when no blows are struck. In this, the mystery becomes part of the fascination. Beyond its famous head, Pachycephalosaurus had a beaked mouth for cropping vegetation, and behind it, rows of small, leaf-shaped teeth. Its diet probably included leaves, fruit, and seeds, plentiful food in its lush Cretaceous home. The stiff tail gave balance, especially useful if it did rear back to butt or ram. Its body was agile, its legs built for quick bursts of speed, and agility mattered because it shared its world with predators like Tyrannosaurus rex, swift dromaeosaurs, and others that would happily make a meal of a distracted dome head. Another layer of intrigue lies in how the dome grew. For a long time, scientists puzzled over whether smaller, flat-headed fossils were different species or simply younger individuals. Studies of bone microstructure now suggest the latter. Juveniles had flatter skulls that thickened with age, meaning the dome was not just a feature, but a signal of maturity. A half-grown Pachycephalosaurus, its head still modest, would not have been competing seriously for dominance. By adulthood, the dome was fully developed, both a badge of status and, potentially, a tool for combat. In the grand variety of dinosaur adaptations, Pachycephalosaurus is almost whimsical. Where others sprouted horns, frills, or armor, this one grew a helmet. Was it for fighting, flirting, or simply standing out in the crowd? We still don't know for sure, and maybe we never will. But that uncertainty is part of its charm. It reminds us that evolution doesn't always move toward elegance or efficiency in ways we expect. Sometimes it chooses strangeness, and in that strangeness, life thrives. Even now, more than 70 million years after Pachycephalosaurus last walked the earth, its thick skull still sparks curiosity, a mystery preserved in stone. And now, let's meet a dinosaur whose appearance could fool you into believing you were staring down a nightmare. Imagine walking through a Cretaceous forest and suddenly finding yourself face to face with a creature more than 30 feet long, with a pot-bellied torso, a long neck, and arms that end in claws as long as swords. Each claw curves menacingly, more than 3 feet in length, sharp-edged and glinting in the sunlight. At first sight, it looks like a monster that has stepped straight from your darkest dreams. This is Therizinosaurus, and at first glance, you would think it was a predator of terrifying proportions. But here's the twist: it wasn't. Despite its dreadful arms, Therizinosaurus was an herbivore. Its claws, those enormous scythe-like tools, were not for tearing flesh, but for pulling down branches, stripping leaves, and perhaps raking fruit into its mouth. It is one of nature's great contradictions, a creature that looked like a nightmare, but lived like a gentle giant. Therizinosaurus belonged to a peculiar branch of theropods, the group that usually included predators like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus. But instead of chasing prey, this lineage took a sharp turn down another evolutionary path. They slowed down, grew bulky, and began eating plants. Where their cousins evolved speed and teeth, Therizinosaurus expanded their bellies into massive digestive chambers and grew claws fit for foraging rather than hunting. Around 70 million years ago, Therizinosaurus wandered the landscapes of what is now Mongolia, a patchwork of forests, rivers, and floodplains. Its long neck gave it reach into high branches, while its barrel-shaped body housed the fermentation chambers needed to break down tough vegetation. Its beaked mouth nipped leaves with surprising delicacy, a strange contrast to the brutal image its claws projected. Behind the beak, a few small teeth lingered, but they were not the main tools. Those claws, though, must have been multi-purpose. While they were designed for gathering plants, they could have been formidable weapons in a pinch. A swipe from a claw that long could slash open any predator bold enough to come close. Some scientists even suggest they might have helped the animal rear up against trees, pulling branches down within reach. Picture it standing in a quiet grove, claws hooking a heavy branch, dragging it down, and carefully stripping it of leaves, like some nightmarish gardener calmly tending the forest. Its appearance was so bizarre that when the first fossils were discovered, paleontologists thought the claws belonged to a giant turtle. Only later did the true picture come together: a towering, feathered, plant-eating dinosaur, armed with the largest claws ever seen on land. If you imagine it now, the image is surreal: a shaggy-bodied giant with feathers, a small head with a beak, a long pot belly, and claws that look as if they should belong to some fantasy beast. And yet it thrived. Strange as it was, Therizinosaurus was not a failure of design, but a testament to how flexible evolution can be. It took the framework of a predator and remade it into a slow, deliberate herbivore, one that defended itself with the very tools it used to feed. So as the night deepens and you close your eyes, imagine these creatures moving once more through their ancient forests. The impossibly long neck of Mamenchisaurus swaying high above the canopy, the gleaming dome of Pachycephalosaurus catching the afternoon light, the outstretched claws of Therizinosaurus curved like sickles, dragging branches down from the trees, each one strange, each one improbable, and each one in its own way perfect. The scythe-like claws of Therizinosaurus are often the first thing people imagine, but to really picture it in life, we need to step back and take in the whole creature. Fossil studies tell us that it wasn't smooth-skinned, like the massive sauropods, or plated like an Ankylosaurus. Instead, Therizinosaurus wore a loose coat of primitive feathers, simple hair-like filaments that covered much of its body. These feathers were not for soaring into the skies, but they had their uses. They trapped warmth, helping to regulate body temperature during cooler nights. They may have been bright in patches, used in displays to attract mates or to warn rivals. And in nesting seasons, they could even have served as a soft blanket, pulled gently around eggs to keep them safe. Picture it, a hulking figure, 30 feet long from beak to tail, its pot-bellied body swaying as it walked. Sunlight falls across a shag of feathers that ripple in the breeze. From the end of its long arms curve those claws, 3 to each hand, each one as long as a grown person's arm, glinting darkly as they catch the light. From a distance, it looks like a nightmare stitched together from mismatched parts. The stance of a predator, the belly of a grazing giant, the arms of a monster, and the quiet, deliberate pace of a forager. When the first claws were uncovered in Mongolia during the 1940s, paleontologists were baffled. They were enormous, longer than any claws ever discovered from a land animal. Some scientists thought they must have belonged to a giant turtle, imagining a slow, armored reptile that pulled itself along riverbanks with these fearsome hooks. Only decades later, when more bones were unearthed, did the fuller picture emerge. Therizinosaurus was no turtle, but one of the strangest dinosaurs ever to evolve. Even today, complete skeletons are scarce. Much of our understanding comes from piecing together fragments and comparing them with smaller, related species. In some ways, it is still a mystery animal, half revealed, as though evolution left us only hints of what it once was. Despite its terrifying hands, Therizinosaurus was not a predator. Its head was small, ending in a beak rather than a mouth of knives. Behind the beak may have sat a few peg-like teeth, but nothing suited to slicing meat. Instead, its anatomy points firmly to a herbivorous diet. Those claws were tools, not talons, perfect for pulling down high branches, stripping leaves, and raking in bunches of vegetation. Imagine it standing at the edge of a grove, rearing slightly as its claws curl over a thick branch. With a slow pull, it drags the greenery down, feathers shifting softly, potbelly swaying. It leans forward and clips foliage neatly with its beak, swallowing leaves whole. Its digestive system must have been immense, a fermentation vat that turned rough plant fibers into usable energy. Like cows or elephants today, Therizinosaurus likely relied on gut microbes to break down the meals it swallowed, nearly unchewed. Its barrel chest, broad and round, was shaped by this need, a living chamber where meals were processed slowly, day by day, where swift predators burned energy in bursts of speed. This giant played the long game, moving slowly, feeding deliberately, conserving energy with every step. Still, those claws cannot be explained by feeding alone. Their sheer size suggests they had multiple roles. In times of danger, they would have been formidable weapons. Imagine a predator like Tarbosaurus, a close cousin of T-Rex, circling through the forest. Most herbivores would flee at the sight of such a hunter, but Therizinosaurus could stand its ground. Arms raised, claws outstretched, it would sway its long upper body from side to side. One swipe could open deep gashes in flesh, or at the very least, convince even the boldest predator to think twice. Defense through intimidation may have been just as important as physical combat. This layering of function, feeding, defense, and display, is not unusual in nature. Consider the antlers of a stag, tools for combat, symbols of dominance, ornaments of beauty, or the tusks of an elephant, capable of uprooting trees, defending against predators, and yet also key to social status. Evolution often takes one feature and spins it into many uses, and in Therizinosaurus, we see that pattern written large. Life for this giant would have been slow, but not lonely. Some reconstructions suggest they may have gathered in loose groups, especially around nesting sites. Females could have used their long claws to scrape shallow nests in the soil, pulling vegetation into rough mounds to cradle their eggs. Their feathers may have been fluffed around the clutches, keeping the developing young at just the right temperature. Males may have circled nearby, displaying their arms and feathers in awkward but dramatic dances. We cannot know for sure, but the evidence hints that they were more than solitary wanderers. Even walking through their world would have been an experience. The late Cretaceous landscapes of Mongolia were a patchwork of forests and floodplains, crossed by rivers that shifted with the seasons. During wet months, green growth would have been abundant, perfect for slow grazers. During drier spells, Therizinosaurus may have moved from grove to grove, conserving energy, stretching its long arms to pull down any greenery still within reach. Imagine the sight at dusk, a small group of them standing in silhouette, claws outstretched against the sinking sun, bodies swaying as they feed. And always there was the paradox, a herbivore in the frame of a predator, a peaceful forager, wearing the weapons of a monster. To see it in life would have been to question your own instincts. Do you run from it, or does it run from you? Its very design challenges the idea that we can categorize animals neatly. Therizinosaurus reminds us that evolution's creativity does not follow straight lines. Sometimes it leaps sideways into strangeness and produces something utterly unique. From the slow swaying of Therizinosaurus, we move to another dinosaur whose strangeness was equally spectacular, but expressed in a different way. Where one wore its claws like scythes, the other carried music in its skull. Picture a broad floodplain in North America, 80 million years ago. Morning mist clings to the ferns. Herds of duck-billed dinosaurs graze in the damp air, their flattened snouts sweeping across low plants. And then one head rises above the rest. From the back of its skull curves a long, elegant crest, arcing backward like a great horn. This is Parasaurolophus, and its headgear makes it one of the most iconic dinosaurs of all. At first, the crest might seem like decoration, a flourish of bone and skin meant to make its owner stand out, but inside, the structure is far more complex. CT scans of fossil skulls reveal hollow tubes winding through the crest, connected to the nasal passages. This strange plumbing hints at a remarkable ability. Parasaurolophus may have been able to produce deep, resonant calls simply by pushing air through its head. Imagine standing on that floodplain as dawn breaks. A low, haunting note rolls through the mist, echoing like the horn of a ship across water. Then another answers from farther away, and another, until the air is filled with overlapping tones. Each call is slightly different, shaped by the unique structure of each crest. To us, it would have sounded eerie, otherworldly. To them, it was the sound of belonging, a way of finding each other in tall vegetation, a way of warning of danger, a way of courting mates. The crest may also have been bright in color, covered in skin that flushed during displays. A flash of red or orange, paired with a low booming note, would have been impossible to ignore. In this way, Parasaurolophus turned its skull into both an instrument and a billboard, broadcasting its presence in sound and color. Juveniles carried only small studs of crest, which lengthened and hollowed as they grew. By adulthood, the fully developed structure was not only a tool for communication, but a symbol of maturity and readiness to compete for mates. Parasaurolophus itself was a large animal, around 30 feet long, capable of moving on both 2 and 4 legs. Its teeth were arranged in dense dental batteries, hundreds packed together, perfectly suited for grinding tough vegetation. It lived as part of herds, where numbers offered protection against predators. And here, the crest's role in communication would have been vital. Imagine a group spread across a valley, hidden by tall cycads and shrubs. Visual contact would have been limited, but sound could carry. A call from one end of the herd to the other might have guided movement, coordinated grazing, or raised alarm at the approach of a tyrannosaur. Not all scientists agree on the musical theory. Some suggest the crest may have helped regulate temperature, acting as a radiator for blood vessels. Others think it may have improved the sense of smell. But even if those functions played a role, the evidence of resonance chambers is hard to ignore. And the idea that dinosaurs lived in a world filled with sound, not just roars, but deep, haunting notes shaped by bone, adds a richness to our picture of prehistory. The more closely scientists have studied Parasaurolophus, the more its crest seems to stand at the crossroads of practicality and spectacle. Nature, after all, rarely builds something so elaborate without squeezing every ounce of utility from it. Perhaps the hollow passages cooled warm blood as it flowed near the surface. Perhaps the convoluted nasal cavity sharpened the sense of smell, letting these dinosaurs detect food or predators on the wind. Yet alongside those practical uses was the showpiece, sound, and in sound, community. To live in a herd of Parasaurolophus must have been to live inside an orchestra. Imagine the early evening light falling over a river valley. Herds stretch along the banks, their reflections shimmering in the water. Then a low call begins, drawn out and mournful, echoing against the distant hills. One animal lifts its head, then another, and the chorus grows. Their notes overlap, some deeper, some higher, until the floodplain vibrates with a living hum. For us, the sound would have been alien, but to them it was ordinary life, a constant web of communication. Safety lay in that chorus, a reassurance that the herd was intact. Fossil discoveries reveal that there were several species of Parasaurolophus, each with slight differences in crest shape and length. This variation hints at subtle divergences in sound and display. One population may have produced a deeper, booming note, while another carried higher, more nasal tones. Just as different bird species today sing their own songs, so too may the crests of Parasaurolophus have tuned each herd's identity. These differences might even have helped prevent confusion when herds overlapped on the same floodplains, ensuring each group could distinguish its own members. Young Parasaurolophus did not immediately carry the full grandeur of their species. Juveniles bore only small crests, like short stubs, and their calls would have been simple, higher-pitched, and less resonant. Over time, as the crest elongated and the tubes inside grew more complex, A voice would deepen. In this way, the crest was more than ornament. It was a signal of age, maturity, and readiness. Adults with large, symmetrical crests and strong calls would have been favored in social interactions, chosen as mates, or deferred to as leaders. The crest, in other words, was both a tool and a biography, recording the passage of time in its growing length. When paleontologists first uncovered Parasaurolophus fossils in the 1920s, they were captivated by the silhouette. Early reconstructions imagined the crest jutting forward like a unicorn's horn, a strange and unlikely guess based on partial bones. Later finds corrected the image, sweeping the crest backward in its true arc, and with that correction came a flood of questions about its function. Since then, Parasaurolophus has become one of the most recognizable dinosaurs in popular culture. Its outline, long snout, sweeping crest, is unmistakable, often appearing in films, documentaries, and illustrations as the emblem of strange beauty in the Age of Dinosaurs. It challenges us to reconsider dinosaurs not as brutish survival machines, but as complex, social, even graceful creatures. Here was an animal whose most striking feature may not have been for attack or defense at all, but for communication, a sign that even in prehistory, life could be shaped by the need to speak, to sing, to be heard. At more than 20 feet long and weighing close to 8 tons, Ankylosaurus was not fast. It was not tall. It carried no graceful crest and sang no haunting calls. Yet in its own way, it was as extraordinary as any Parasaurolophus. Every inch of its body was sculpted for survival. Along its back, neck, and flanks, rows of osteoderms, bony plates embedded in skin, formed an armored carapace. Some rose into ridges, others into knobs, some even into short spikes that jutted from the shoulders and hips, covered in keratin when alive. Like the horn of a rhinoceros, they may have gleamed smooth or worn rough with age, catching the sun in dull flashes as the animal moved. Its skull was no less fortified, but bone was thick, reinforced with ridges and bosses. Small horns projected backward from the skull's rear corners, giving its head the look of a natural helmet. Even the eyelids carried protection, bony shutters that could close over the eyes in times of danger. Imagine facing such a creature as a predator. There are no soft flanks to seize, no exposed areas to exploit. It is a walking shield, an animal designed not to run from the fight, but to deny it altogether. And then there was the tail. At the end of its long, muscular tail sat the most famous weapon of all, a massive club of fused vertebrae sheathed in solid bone. Driven by powerful tendons and muscles, the club could swing with devastating force. A single strike could shatter bone, the leg of a charging predator, the ribs of a careless rival. Fossil records even hint at healed fractures in large theropods that might have been delivered by such blows. To watch it in action would have been to witness raw physics, hundreds of pounds of momentum, muscle, and bone colliding in a single, brutal swing. Yet this weapon was likely used sparingly. Swinging a heavy club took energy, and injury was always a risk. Most of the time, the threat alone would have been enough. A predator circling an Ankylosaurus would see the broad armored back, the spiked flanks, and the heavy tail swaying slowly, warningly. Like a porcupine raising its quills, or a muskox lowering its horns, the signal was clear: come closer at your peril. In most cases, that signal would have been deterrent enough. Despite its defenses, Ankylosaurus was no predator. Its wide, beaked mouth was shaped for cropping low vegetation. Ferns, cycads, ground-level shrubs, these were its meals. Inside the jaws, small leaf-shaped teeth worked in rows, better for shredding than chewing. Digestion must have relied on fermentation, a long, slow process that took place in the vast gut housed within its broad, low-slung body. Life for Ankylosaurus was not about speed or agility. It was about persistence. Step by armored step, it moved across the landscape, grazing, digesting, surviving. Predators like Tyrannosaurus may still have targeted Ankylosaurus, but the risks were immense. A misjudged strike could cripple a hunter. Even for the apex predator of its age, caution was warranted. Fossil evidence suggests that ankylosaurs lived in environments shared with tyrannosaurs, and it is easy to imagine tense standoffs, the giant predator circling, the armored herbivore turning slowly to keep its club angled in defense, both animals weighing the costs of a fight. The armor itself was not uniform. Each osteoderm was slightly different, arranged in careful patterns across the back and flanks. Some were keeled, rising into ridges that cast small shadows in the sun. In life, they may have been covered with keratin sheaths, giving them texture and perhaps even subtle patterns. It is possible that these arrangements had visual functions as well, helping individuals recognize one another or signaling health and vigor. Even in armor, there may have been display. The nasal passages of Ankylosaurus were another curiosity. They wound and twisted through the skull in complex patterns, far more elaborate than simple breathing required. Some researchers suggest they improve the sense of smell, useful for detecting food or sensing predators. Others propose that the passages helped regulate temperature, cooling air as it flowed in and out. A few have even speculated that the nasal architecture could have shaped sound, allowing the dinosaur to produce low, resonant calls. If so, Ankylosaurus may not have been as silent as its armored frame suggests. Perhaps deep rumbles passed between individuals, vibrations felt more than heard. A hidden communication within the forest. Picture it now, moving slowly across a Cretaceous plain. Sunlight flickers off the ridges of its back. Ferns part beneath its beak. Behind, the tail sways, club heavy and steady, ready at a moment's notice. In the shadows, a predator watches, weighs its chances, then slips away to seek easier prey. Ankylosaurus does not notice. Or perhaps it does, and simply does not care. Its defenses are already enough. In a world where some dinosaurs dazzled with crests, where others experimented with feathers, sails, or horns, Ankylosaurus reminds us of another path, the path of endurance, of fortification, of standing firm. Evolution shaped it into a fortress, a living bulwark that could outlast even the fiercest hunters. And in that quiet persistence, it thrived until the very end of the Age of Dinosaurs. The plains stretch wide, the horizon broken only by low shrubs and stands of hardy conifers. Wind rushes across the open country, stirring dust into faint spirals that scatter in the heat. In this landscape, survival is not about armor or weaponry. It is about speed. Out of the shimmering haze, a group of long-legged shapes comes into view, moving as one. Heads bob in rhythm, tails held straight, and the ground seems to vibrate with the pounding of dozens of feet. These are Gallimimus, the ostrich mimics, and in them we see the art of running refined to perfection. At first glance, they look strangely familiar, almost bird-like. Their long necks stretch forward, their small heads tipped with toothless beaks. Their bodies are light, skeletons built from hollow bones that minimize weight without losing strength. And then there are the legs. Long, slender, perfectly proportioned for striding across the ground at astonishing speed. Fossil evidence suggests that Gallimimus could run at up to 35 miles per hour, a pace comparable to a modern ostrich. In a world where predators like Tarbosaurus lurked, speed was more than convenience. It was life insurance. To picture Gallimimus properly, imagine a creature the size of a horse, nearly 20 feet from snout to tail, yet built far more lightly. Its three-toed feet strike the ground in a rhythm designed to minimize wasted energy. Its tail acts as a counterweight, keeping its forward-leaning body perfectly balanced even at top speed. The whole animal is tuned like a machine for efficiency, every pound trimmed, every angle refined. Millions of years of evolution shaped it into the consummate runner of the late Cretaceous. But speed alone doesn't tell the whole story. What did Gallimimus eat with that toothless beak? That question has intrigued paleontologists since its discovery. Without sharp teeth, it was no hunter of large prey. Without grinding molars, it was poorly equipped to chew tough plants. The truth may be that Gallimimus was an opportunist. Some suggest it snapped up small animals and insects when it could, its beak plucking them quickly from the ground. Others propose a diet heavy in seeds, fruits, and soft vegetation, food that required little processing. Still others have pointed to ridges along the inside of the beak that resemble the structures in modern ducks, raising the possibility that Gallimimus may have sifted through sediment, straining out edible matter. Whatever the answer, its diet was likely broad, as flexible as its lifestyle required. In a competitive environment where predators dominated and resources shifted with the seasons, adaptability was a survival skill, every bit as valuable as speed. The world Gallimimus inhabited was not the desert we see in the Gobi today, but a patchwork of rivers, lakes, and forests. 60 or 70 million years ago, these plains were alive with diversity. Horned protoceratops herds, nimble velociraptors lurking in the undergrowth, and the massive shadow of Tarbosaurus stalking the edges of wetlands. In such company, Gallimimus needed its keen eyes and long legs to stay alive. Its large eye sockets suggest sharp vision, perhaps capable of picking out movement at long distances. Imagine a herd grazing along the edge of a river. A ripple of alarm passes through them. A predator spotted on the horizon. In an instant, necks stretch, tails stiffen, and the whole group surges forward. Dust rises behind them as they vanish across the plain, predators left chasing nothing but echoes. The idea of Gallimimus living in groups is more than speculation. Fossil discoveries have revealed multiple individuals preserved together, suggesting that they did not live solitary lives. Safety in numbers has always been a reliable strategy. A single Gallimimus could be singled out, but a herd presented dozens of eyes to scan for danger and dozens of bodies to confuse a hunter's aim. The image of them sprinting across the landscape together is one of the most dynamic visions of the dinosaur age, a living wave of muscle and speed sweeping across the earth. Their long arms add another dimension to the picture. Though incapable of flight, they ended in clawed hands that may have been used to grasp food, rake through foliage, or even for display in courtship rituals. Evidence from relatives suggests that Gallimimus may have been feathered, its body draped in simple, filamentous down. If so, the feathers could have served both practical and social functions, regulating body temperature in a high metabolism runner, and perhaps flaring in courtship displays. Picture a male lifting its arms, feathers catching the sunlight, while it darts gracefully around a female, a performance of speed and color designed to impress. Gallimimus was first uncovered in the 1960s, during joint Mongolian-Polish expeditions into the Gobi Desert. The fossils lay in sandstone shaped by ancient rivers, testimony to the lush habitats that once filled this now barren landscape. From those bones emerged the image of a dinosaur that bridged familiar and alien worlds. Bird-like in body, dinosaurian in soul. And beyond the scientific importance, Gallimimus has captured public imagination. Popular culture has shown it sprinting across screens, outpacing predators, embodying the essence of speed. But the real animal was even more remarkable. It was not just fast. It was the culmination of an evolutionary path that favored agility, awareness, and endurance over brute force. From the dusty plains of Mongolia, we move eastward in imagination to the forests of early Cretaceous China. Here, the landscape could not be more different. Tall conifers and early flowering plants create a canopy that filters sunlight into shifting green-gold patterns. Screams thread between the roots. Insects hum in the humid air, and branches weave a layered world above the ground. It is a place where survival favors not speed, but agility, not strength, but adaptability. And into this vertical realm leaps one of the strangest dinosaurs ever discovered, Microraptor. Barely larger than a crow, just 2.5 feet from nose to tail, Microraptor carried an innovation that sets it apart from almost every other dinosaur. Feathers covered its body, sleek and dark, with a sheen that caught the light like oil on water. Long flight feathers extended not only from its arms, but also from its legs, forming a second set of wings. When stretched wide, the silhouette of Microraptor must have resembled some fantastical creature from myth. Half bird, half dragonfly, gliding silently between the trees. The preservation of Microraptor fossils is extraordinary. In the fossil beds of Liaoning Province, fine volcanic ash captured even the delicate outline of feathers, preserving them in astonishing detail. We can see the asymmetry in the flight feathers, the structure that allowed them to generate lift. We can trace the fan of feathers at the tip of the long tail, a rudder for steering in midair. We can even glimpse the microscopic pigment structures that reveal the feathers' iridescent black and blue shimmer. To hold such a fossil is to hold a ghost of color from 100 million years ago. A flash of light from deep time. How exactly Microraptor used its 4 wings remains debated. Some scientists argue it launched from tree branches, gliding to other trunks with hind wings stretched behind to increase lift. Others suggest steep, controlled descents, dropping from above onto unsuspecting prey. In either case, those extra wings gave it maneuverability no other dinosaur possessed. It was not a strong flyer like modern birds, but it was a master glider, a creature that turned the forest canopy into a playground. Imagine standing in that forest. The air is warm, filled with the scent of resin and damp earth. A faint flutter catches your eye. Something small leaps from a high branch. For a heartbeat it seems to fall, then its limbs splay wide, 4 wings catching the air. It tilts, curves, adjusts, and drifts gracefully across the gap to another tree. Sunlight strikes the feathers, and for a moment the tiny body gleams blue-black, iridescent like a crow's wing. Then it vanishes into the shadows, a whisper of motion, a fragment of wonder. Microraptor's life was lived in 3 dimensions. On the ground, it may have moved awkwardly, feathers brushing against leaves and soil. But the moment it scrambled up a trunk and leapt outward, gravity and air became its allies. Each glide was a calculation of angles. How far? How steep? How fast to tilt the tail fan to adjust the descent? In this dance, mistakes were rare, because mistakes meant falling short of the next branch. Survival depended on mastery, and Microraptor was a creature that had honed its mastery to elegance. Its claws tell part of the story. They were sharply curved, perfect for gripping bark as it clambered up toward a launch point. Modern birds of prey use similar claws to clutch perches or seize prey, and Microraptors must have served the same dual role. Once aloft, the claws tucked in close to the feathered body, streamlining its silhouette. When it landed, those claws dug deep, anchoring it instantly to the new branch. In every part of its anatomy, there's the mark of adaptation to a vertical world. The discovery of Microraptor in the early 2000s was a watershed moment in paleontology. Until then, the idea of four-winged dinosaurs sounded like pure speculation, almost fantastical. Yet here was proof, etched into stone so finely that even feather barbs were visible. It confirmed not only that feathers evolved well before true birds, but that the evolutionary path toward flight was not straightforward. It was a branching tree with multiple experiments in gliding and flapping. Some lineages, like Microraptor, flourished for a time before vanishing. Others gave rise to birds as we know them. Evolution is not a straight march toward perfection. It is 1,000 different attempts, most of them temporary, but each remarkable. Microraptor also reminds us that beauty existed in the deep past. Analyses of melanosomes, microscopic pigment carriers and feathers, suggest that its plumage shimmered with iridescent black and blue. Picture that, a crow-sized dinosaur gliding through shafts of sunlight, feathers flashing like satin ribbons. Perhaps these colors played a role in courtship, one Microraptor catching the eye of another as it drifted between branches. Perhaps they offered camouflage, breaking up the body's outline in the dappled shadows of the forest. Whatever the reason, they gave this tiny dinosaur an aesthetic presence that we can still imagine vividly. Its diet reveals its opportunism. Stomach contents from fossils show bones of small mammals, the scales of lizards, even fish remains. This suggests a creature that was willing to try anything edible, a generalist hunter in a dangerous world. Picture it crouching on a branch above a stream. Below, fish ripple the surface. With a leap, wings spread, claws extended. It dropped silently and snatches one before fluttering to the bank. That ability to exploit multiple food sources may explain why Microraptor thrived in ecosystems crowded with larger, more specialized predators. Yet for all its advantages, Microraptor was vulnerable. It lived in a world with larger dromaeosaurs, with early birds competing for aerial niches, and with predators on the ground ready to snap it up if it strayed too low. Its strength lay in versatility. It could hunt above, below, and in between, surviving in the cracks left by bigger hunters. Microraptor's story leaves us with a sense of wonder. The fossil record does not only give us skeletons. In rare cases like Liaoning, it gives us the very impression of feathers, of shape, of color. It lets us see not just a frame of bone, but a living creature in all its detail. To imagine Microraptor gliding silently through the primeval forest is to glimpse a moment of prehistory almost directly, as though the veil of time has thinned. And in that glimpse, we are reminded that not all dinosaurs thundered across the ground. Some whispered through the trees. From those whispering forests of early Cretaceous China, our imagination travels back westward to the wide floodplains of Mongolia, where one of the greatest paleontological mysteries of the 20th century first emerged. The year was 1965, and a team of scientists working in the Gobi Desert uncovered something astonishing. A pair of arms, each more than 8 feet long, ending in claws the size of daggers. Nothing else of the skeleton was present. No skull, no torso, no legs. Just those arms, massive and powerful. They named the creature Deinocheirus mirificus, the unusual terrible hand. For decades, that was almost all anyone knew. The imagination filled the gaps. What sort of animal wielded such enormous claws? Some envisioned a monstrous predator, a cousin of Velociraptor, scaled up to terrifying size. Others thought it might have been a scavenger, using its arms to tear apart carcasses. Still others speculated it was a giant fish-eater, sweeping prey from rivers. With only those arms to study, speculation ran wild. For nearly 50 years, Deinocheirus was more rumor than reality. A ghost dinosaur defined by its reach. That ghost finally took form in the early 21st century. Through new discoveries and the reunification of fossil material scattered across museums and even private collections, paleontologists were able to reconstruct the whole creature. And the truth was stranger than any fiction. Deinocheirus was a giant, 35 feet long and weighing several tons. It belonged to the ornithomimosaurs, the ostrich mimics, a group usually characterized by lightweight bodies and speed. But Deinocheirus broke every rule of that lineage. Its frame was bulky, with a deep, wide body. Along its back, tall neural spines rose from the vertebrae, forming a hump or sail. Its arms, while massive, ended not in slashing claws, but in blunt, shovel-like tips, better suited for digging or pulling vegetation than for combat. And its skull? Far from the fearsome visage once imagined, it was broad and flat, tipped with a wide, toothless beak, more like that of a duck than a predator. Inside that beak, grooves lined the surface, suggesting an ability to grip slippery food. Fossilized stomach contents confirmed the suspicion. Fish bones lay preserved alongside plant material. Deinocheirus was an omnivore, feeding on riverbank vegetation and scooping up fish from the water. This bulky, humpbacked giant spent its life in wetlands, wading slowly through shallows, sweeping its long arms to gather plants, and dipping its beak to snatch whatever else it could. The hump along its back remains one of its most debated features. Formed by elongated spines, it could have supported a fatty deposit like a camel's, storing energy for lean times. Or it may have borne a sail used for display, regulating temperature, or signaling to other members of its kind. Whatever the purpose, it gave Deinocheirus a silhouette like no other dinosaur. A bizarre blend of duck, ostrich, and humpback. And then there were the arms, the original mystery. In life, they were cloaked in muscle, granting immense strength. They may have been used to pull down branches, rake aquatic plants, or dig at riverbanks. In confrontations, they could have been spread wide to intimidate rivals or deter predators. Yet they were not the weapons of a killer. They were the tools of a forager, repurposed by evolution from terrifying appendages into versatile instruments of survival. Despite its bulk, Deinocheirus was not invulnerable. Tarbosaurus prowled the same floodplains, and a juvenile Deinocheirus would have been tempting prey. Yet an adult, standing tall with arms spread, would have been a formidable sight. The sheer size of its frame, the sweep of its claws, and the bulk of its body must have made even the hungriest predator cautious. The rediscovery of Deinocheirus is a story of persistence in science. Fossils were looted, hidden, and scattered across continents before they were finally reunited. Piece by piece, paleontologists reconstructed the puzzle, And when the full skeleton was revealed, the image it painted was more bizarre than anyone had imagined. The terrible hand, it turned out, belonged not to a nightmare predator, but to a peaceful omnivore, at home in wetlands, feeding slowly under the Cretaceous sun. The story of Deinocheirus teaches us humility. For decades, we imagined a monster. What we found instead was stranger and subtler, a creature that blurred categories, combining traits of herbivores, omnivores, and even aquatic foragers. It's a reminder that the fossil record is incomplete, that each fragment hints at truths we may not yet understand, and that nature's designs often defy our expectations. The rivers of the Cretaceous were alive with more than fish and crocodiles. Beneath the shimmering surface lurked something altogether stranger, a predator that blurred the line between land and water, reptile and leviathan. It was not just another large theropod, not another ground-shaking giant like Tyrannosaurus or Giganotosaurus, but something that seemed almost stitched together from parts borrowed across the animal kingdom. A crocodile's jaws, a sail like the fin of an ancient sea monster, a body heavy and deep-chested, a tail that rippled like a paddle. This was Spinosaurus, a creature so strange that even a century after its discovery, paleontologists still wrestle with the puzzle of what it really was. Size alone set it apart. At over 50 feet long, some estimates even stretching beyond that, Spinosaurus may well have been the largest predatory dinosaur to ever walk, or perhaps swim, on Earth. It exceeded Tyrannosaurus rex in sheer length, though not in bulk, and carried itself with a presence that must have seemed otherworldly to anything sharing its rivers. Where most giant theropods were apex hunters of plains and forests, Spinosaurus was a specialist, built to dominate the waterways of Cretaceous North Africa. Its skull is the first feature that commands attention. Long and narrow, studded with conical teeth that lacked the serrations of a bone crusher's arsenal. It looked less like the head of a tyrant lizard and more like a crocodile's elongated snout. Those teeth were perfectly designed for gripping, not slicing. Fish, slick and fast, would have had little chance once clamped between those jaws. Even the placement of its nostrils reveals its aquatic leanings. They sat farther back along the snout, allowing Spinosaurus to breathe while much of its face remained submerged, exactly the kind of adaptation we see in crocodiles today. The parallels are striking, both animals relying on stealth, waiting with only the tip of their snout breaking the surface before striking with sudden force. But the crocodile-like skull was only the beginning. Spinosaurus also had hind limbs that were proportionally shorter than those of its theropod cousins. Instead of towering on long, powerful legs like a tyrannosaur, it had a somewhat squat, almost awkward stance on land. Its center of gravity was shifted, its gait less suited to sprinting across open plains. These shortened legs make more sense when paired with its massive, muscular tail. Unlike the stiff balancing tails of many theropods, Spinosaurus's tail was broad and flexible, its vertebrae elongated into tall spines that gave it a profile not unlike that of a newt or crocodile. This tail was no passive counterbalance. It was a propulsive organ, sweeping side to side through water with powerful strokes, driving the animal forward like an oar. Recent studies that modeled the biomechanics of its tail showed it could generate thrust far beyond what other theropods could manage. And then there was the sail. Rising from its back were neural spines that extended more than 5 feet into the air, each connected by tissue that must have stretched into a towering fin. In life, the sail may have reached over 6 feet tall, giving Spinosaurus a silhouette unmatched in the dinosaur world. What it was for remains a matter of debate. Some paleontologists suggest it was a billboard for display, its skin perhaps flush with color during mating season, visible even across murky riverbanks. Others argue it helped regulate body temperature, acting like a giant radiator, absorbing morning heat like a solar panel, or shedding excess warmth during the peak of the day. Still others propose that it could have served as a stabilizer in the water, an adaptation not entirely unlike the dorsal fins of fish or whales. Perhaps it was all of these at once, a multi-purpose structure, as evolution so often prefers. To imagine Spinosaurus is to imagine a hunter that straddled two worlds. On land, it may have lumbered, heavy-set and ungainly compared to fleet-footed hunters. But in the water, it was transformed. Picture the rivers of Cretaceous North Africa, lined with ferns and palms, winding between low floodplains. Beneath the surface, shadows shift as schools of giant sawfish drift in slow arcs. Then a ripple. A vast shape surges forward, tail lashing in sweeping curves, long jaws snapping shut around a fish longer than a man is tall. Water sprays skyward, sunlight glinting off the sail's wet surface. For a moment, predator and prey thrash together before the river grows still again. This was Spinosaurus's kingdom, a predator that embraced an aquatic life on a scale no other dinosaur attempted. Its environment was no empty stage. These rivers were crowded with life. Massive crocodilians, such as Sarcosuchus, prowled the shallows, their armor-plated bodies lurking just beneath the surface. Carcharodontosaurus, another giant theropod, stalked the drier floodplains, its blade-like teeth designed to slice flesh. Yet by turning to the waterways, Spinosaurus carved out a niche that set it apart. Rather than competing directly with these rivals, it specialized in hunting fish that others could not reach so effectively. With its size, its adaptations, and its dominance of the rivers, few creatures dared challenge it. Its forelimbs added to the picture. Strong and muscular, they were tipped with large claws that may have served multiple purposes, grappling slippery prey, tearing apart carcasses, or hauling its bulk up the muddy banks of its rivers. Unlike the stubby, vestigial arms of a tyrannosaur, Spinosaurus's arms remained functional weapons, tools adapted to the challenges of an amphibious lifestyle. Combined with its powerful jaws and tail, it was an animal with options. It could scavenge, ambush, chase, or rake prey toward itself in the water. Spinosaurus's discovery story adds a layer of tragedy and mystery to its legend. The first fossils were unearthed in Egypt in the early 20th century by German paleontologist Ernst Stromer. He recognized the uniqueness of what he had found, a giant theropod with spines like no other. Sadly, those fossils were destroyed during World War II, when Allied bombers struck Munich, reducing Stromer's precious specimens to dust. For decades, the dinosaur was known only from his notes and photographs, a ghost in the scientific record. Reconstructions were speculative, ranging from odd-looking Allosaurus-like predators with sails to creatures more akin to Dimetrodon. It wasn't until the 21st century, with new discoveries in Morocco, that the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. The shorter legs, the broad tail, the aquatic features, all of these forced paleontologists to reconsider what Spinosaurus really was. And even now, debate continues. Some reconstructions depict it as a fully aquatic predator, slipping beneath the surface and pursuing fish with the grace of an otter scaled up to monstrous proportions. Others see it as more of a wader, standing in the shallows like a heron, its jaws snapping shut on prey that strayed too close. Both visions carry weight, and both may hold part of the truth. Evolution often creates animals that blend strategies. Perhaps Spinosaurus was capable of both, gliding powerfully through water when it needed to, but also stalking patiently at river edges when stealth offered the better chance of success. One thing seems clear. Spinosaurus was not simply a slower, stranger cousin of Tyrannosaurus. It was something altogether different, a predator reshaped by the demands of rivers and floodplains. Its body told a story of adaptation. The elongated jaws for gripping fish, the nostrils set back for breathing while partially submerged, the tail redesigned for swimming, the sail standing tall as a multi-purpose structure. Each feature was a piece of an evolutionary experiment that produced one of the strangest predators ever to live. Visualize Spinosaurus now, not as a skeleton in a museum, but as it once was. A broad river flows under a hot sun, its surface broken by the gliding shape of the sail. Beneath, the massive tail sweeps side to side, moving the animal forward with deceptive ease. Fish scatter, their scales flashing like coins in the light. The jaws snap, water churns, and then silence again as the sail vanishes beneath the ripples. Along the muddy bank, palm fronds stir in the breeze, but no other predator dares approach. The river belongs to the sailback giant. Even in an age that produced towering sauropods, horned ceratopsians, and armored ankylosaurs, Spinosaurus remains singular. It was a creature that refused to be defined by land alone. It embraced water, took its place among the crocodiles and giant fish, and in doing so, wrote a chapter of prehistory that still fascinates us today. Its story is one of mystery, of discovery lost and rediscovered, of debate and speculation. But above all, it is a reminder of how varied and experimental life can be. Evolution is not a straight path. It is a river, flowing, branching, doubling back, carving new channels. And in one of those channels, in the rivers of Cretaceous Africa, it shaped Spinosaurus, the crocodile-jawed, sail-backed river giant. From the rivers that Spinosaurus ruled, let your gaze drift upward, above the floodplains, higher than the tallest trees, and far beyond the reach of any dinosaur below. The sky belonged to another set of giants. They were not dinosaurs in the strictest sense, but their presence defined the horizon just as surely as Spinosaurus defined the waterways. These were the Azhdarchid pterosaurs, the last and largest of their kind, and among them, two names echo with particular force: Quetzalcoatlus and Cryodrakon. To see one in flight would have been an almost surreal experience. Imagine a wingspan stretching more than 30 feet across, the length of a small aircraft, yet feather-light in construction. Their bones were hollow, walls as thin as paper, but strengthened with intricate internal struts. This was engineering that nature had perfected long before humans ever dreamed of flight. An architecture so efficient that it allowed an animal the size of a giraffe to lift from the ground and soar with grace. Quetzalcoatlus, named after the feathered serpent god of Mesoamerican mythology, lived in what is now Texas during the final chapters of the Cretaceous. Cryodrakon, whose name means cold dragon, soared further north in the ancient skies of Canada. Though they were close relatives, their lives may have overlapped only in spirit, one dominating the warmer southern plains, and the other haunting cooler northern landscapes. Both, however, pushed the very limits of flight physics. On the ground, these giants were equally astonishing. Standing upright, they could have matched the height of a giraffe, their long, stiff necks craning forward, heads tapering to sharp beaks longer than a grown man. Their bodies were surprisingly small, relative to their wings and heads, compact to reduce weight. Covered in a hair-like fuzz called pycnofibers, they would not have looked bare-skinned like reptiles, but instead clothed in a soft, insulating layer that blurred the line between reptile and mammal-like textures. For decades, paleontologists puzzled over how such immense creatures could even take off. The answer lies in their unique anatomy. Unlike birds, which launch with their hind limbs, pterosaurs had powerful forelimbs. Azhdarchids used a quad launch, vaulting into the air with explosive power from all four limbs at once, like a pole vaulter pushing off the earth. This allowed them to bypass the size limitations that constrain birds, whose leg-driven launches become less effective as body mass increases. Once airborne, Quetzalcoatlus and Cryodrakon needed only to find a rising column of warm air. With wings outstretched, they could glide for hours, scanning the plains below, every tilt of their head or flick of their wings, fine-tuning their path. What did they seek from such lofty vantage points? Prey. Unlike the fish-catching pterosaurs of earlier ages, Azhdarchids seem to have been more terrestrial in their habits. Their long necks and stork-like proportions suggest a lifestyle akin to giant ground hunters. Picture one striding across a coastal flat, its neck swinging side to side as sharp eyes probe for movement. A small dinosaur, no larger than a turkey, scuttles across the sand. With a quick stab, the long beak closes, and the prey is lifted, swallowed whole in an instant. Mammals, lizards, hatchlings, carrion all could have been part of their diet. They were opportunists, using their size and mobility to exploit a wide range of food sources. On the ground, they must have seemed almost alien. Long forelimbs folded into wings, walking on all fours with an angular, stalking gait, heads balanced far out in front, necks rigid like living cranes. Herds of hadrosaurs grazing in the distance would have looked up warily as one passed, perhaps not directly threatened, but never entirely safe either. In some reconstructions, entire flocks of Quetzalcoatlus patrol the plains together, shadows sweeping over herds and wetlands alike, reminders that danger did not always come from the ground. Their dominance of the skies, however, came with risks. Large predators, such as tyrannosaurs, would have posed a serious threat if an Azhdarchid were caught grounded or encumbered by wind. A takeoff required space and timing. Juveniles, before they reached their massive adult size, would have been particularly vulnerable. It is one of the unsolved mysteries of paleontology how and where these creatures nested. Fossils of nests are scarce, leaving us to imagine cliffside rookeries or wide-open floodplain colonies where parents guarded fragile eggs while scanning the horizon for danger. Yet even with their vulnerabilities, Quetzalcoatlus and Cryodrakon ruled a domain that no dinosaur could challenge. Their reign reminds us that the Mesozoic was not only about the giants of the land or the terrors of the sea. It was also about the kings of the sky, who pushed flight to its breaking point and succeeded. Now imagine the sensory experience. You are on a late Cretaceous plain, the heat rising from the ground in shimmering waves. Suddenly, a vast shadow crosses your path. You look up. Against the blue, a shape glides silently, wings curving like the arcs of a cathedral roof. It banks, the sunlight catching its elongated head, and then with a single powerful motion, it tilts upward, vanishing into the distance. For those who lived below, the sky itself must have felt alive with giants. But the skies were not the only places where strangeness flourished. Back on the ground, In the same broad floodplains of North America lived creatures whose bizarre ornamentation challenged even the sails and wings of Spinosaurus and Quetzalcoatlus. These were the ceratopsians, horned dinosaurs whose skulls became canvases for some of evolution's most extravagant experiments. Among them, Styracosaurus and Cosmoceratops stood apart. Styracosaurus, living around 75 million years ago in what is now Alberta, Canada, carried a frill that looked more like weaponry from a medieval fortress than the skull of a grazing herbivore. 6 enormous spikes jutted from the back of its head, each up to 2 feet long, curving outward like the rays of a sunburst. Add to this a single long horn above its nose, and you have a dinosaur that looked as though it had stepped out of a myth. At 18 feet long and weighing several tons, Styracosaurus was no small animal, and its skull made sure no predator ever forgot it. The function of this spectacular array has long been debated. Was it truly defensive, a shield of spikes to ward off predators like Albertosaurus? Or was it primarily for display, a way of signaling strength, fitness, or identity to members of its own herd? The truth is likely both. In combat, those horns and spikes could certainly wound an attacker, but the energy required to grow and maintain them points strongly toward display as an evolutionary driver. Imagine a herd of Styracosaurus, their frills flushed with color during mating season, each individual turning its head to catch the sun. The spikes would have transformed simple gestures into dazzling signals. Cosmoceratops, living slightly later in what is now Utah, took ornamentation to another level entirely. With 15 horns and horn-like projections on its skull, it looked almost ceremonial, as though nature had indulged in pure decoration. 2 large horns arched forward above the eyes, while the frill itself bristled with a cascade of smaller spikes pointing outward and downward. It was a living crown, baroque in its complexity, and almost certainly evolved for social purposes. Such extravagance would have impressed mates and established hierarchies without constant physical conflict. Like the tail of a peacock or the antlers of a deer, the horns of Cosmoceratops spoke volumes before a single step was taken. Both species remind us that survival was not always about speed or strength alone. Sometimes it was about communication, about impressing, intimidating, or simply standing out. In ecosystems filled with predators, horns and frills may have served a dual purpose: practical defense when needed, and social display the rest of the time. Fossil evidence of healed injuries on ceratopsian skulls suggests that clashes did occur. Frill against frill, horn against horn, contests of strength that must have reverberated across the floodplains. Close your eyes and imagine again. A broad valley stretches before you, rivers winding under a warm sun. A herd of Styracosaurus moves slowly across the floodplain, their spiked frills catching the light. Beyond them, a Cosmoceratops lifts its ornate headgear, horns bristling like a crown against the horizon. Above it all, a shadow drifts silently, perhaps Quetzalcoatlus, returning to roost after a long hunt. The land, the water, the sky, each domain filled with creatures so strange and yet so perfectly adapted that they remind us how endlessly inventive life can be. The world of the ceratopsians, with their flaring frills and elaborate horns, reminds us that defense in the Age of Dinosaurs often came wrapped in spectacle. Yet while some species chose to dazzle predators and rivals with displays of bone and color, others took a different path. For them, survival was about endurance, not showmanship. Their strategy was not to look impressive, but to become as close to indestructible as evolution could manage. And in that realm, Few creatures embody the idea better than the living tanks of the Mesozoic, the Ankylosaurs. Imagine the late Cretaceous forests of North America. Dense stands of conifers and flowering plants fill the air with resinous scents. Ferns cover the ground in thick mats. Somewhere in this green hush, a heavy shape moves with deliberate slowness, each step muffled by the undergrowth. At first glance, it might seem like a boulder shifting of its own accord. Then the details resolve. A broad back covered in rows of bony plates, spikes jutting at angles, and a tail tipped with a weapon of solid bone. This is Ankylosaurus, a creature whose entire body plan was dedicated to one simple purpose: survival at any cost. At over 20 feet long and weighing close to 8 tons, Ankylosaurus was a low-slung powerhouse. Its legs were short and sturdy, holding its massive body close to the ground. From above, it would have looked almost rectangular, a squat fortress moving on 4 columns. Every inch of its upper body was armored with osteoderms, bony plates embedded in the skin. Some were small and pebble-like, others large and fused into broad shields. Over the shoulders, tall triangular spikes jutted outward, discouraging predators from lunging in from the side. The head was no less protected. Its skull was a helmet of bone, with small horns projecting from the cheeks and back. Even its eyelids carried bony plates, giving its eyes the appearance of narrow, watchful slits peering from behind a visor. The crowning feature, however, was the tail club. Formed from fused vertebrae and sheathed in dense bone, the club was a natural mace. Driven by powerful muscles along the tail, it could be swung with bone-breaking force. A well-aimed strike to the leg of a predator, such as Tyrannosaurus rex, could shatter bone, crippling the attacker. Fossil evidence supports this scenario. Some tyrannosaur fossils bear healed leg fractures that may well have been inflicted by ankylosaur clubs. In a landscape ruled by predators, that kind of deterrent was priceless. Despite its formidable defenses, Ankylosaurus was not a creature built for aggression. Its mouth was small and beaked, adapted for cropping low-growing vegetation. Behind the beak, rows of small, leaf-shaped teeth processed ferns, cycads, and angiosperms. It likely spent much of its day moving slowly through undergrowth, sweeping its head from side to gather plants. Its digestion would have relied on fermentation, with a large gut breaking down fibrous material over time. In this sense, it was more like a cow than a warrior. Its daily rhythm, one of steady grazing, punctuated by cautious vigilance. The slow, deliberate pace of an ankylosaur's life belies the evolutionary investment in its armor. Growing and maintaining such extensive bony plating required enormous resources. Why pour so much into defense? The answer lies in the company it kept. Ankylosaurus lived alongside some of the most dangerous predators ever to walk the earth. Tyrannosaurs were a constant presence. Raptors hunted in packs. Even other large herbivores could be dangerous competitors. For an animal that could not rely on speed or stealth, armor was the only option. Better to become too much trouble to attack than to risk a desperate chase. Yet even armor had its limits. The soft underbelly remained vulnerable, and a predator that managed to flip an ankylosaur could reach exposed flesh. This possibility may explain why ankylosaurs kept so close to the ground, and why their bodies were so wide. A low center of gravity made flipping them nearly impossible. Combined with their clubs and spikes, this meant that attacking an adult Ankylosaurus was one of the riskiest gambits a predator could attempt. If Ankylosaurus was the tank, then Borealopelta was the masterpiece of camouflage. Discovered in Alberta, Canada. This ankylosaur stunned paleontologists when its fossil was revealed in 2011. Not only were the bones preserved, but so too were the armor plates in their original arrangement, along with impressions of skin and even chemical traces of pigments. For once, we could see an ankylosaur not just as a skeleton, but almost as it looked in life. What the fossil showed was remarkable. Borealopelta was covered in large osteoderms, many tipped with sharp spikes, particularly around the shoulders. These spikes projected outward like spears, making any attempt at grappling the animal a painful mistake. But the real surprise was in its coloration. Analyses revealed patterns of countershading. Darker tones across the back, lighter tones along the belly. This is the same camouflage strategy used by deer, antelope, and countless other modern animals. The darker back blends with the ground when seen from above, while the lighter underside softens shadows when seen from below. The implications were startling. Here was an animal the size of a bus, bristling with armor and spikes, yet it still relied on camouflage. Why? Because the predators it faced were so formidable that armor alone was not enough. In its environment roamed Acrocanthosaurus, a carnivore 30 feet long with jaws strong enough to test even an armored hide. To a hunter of that size, a mistake could mean death, but so could a desperate lunge that found purchase. For Borealopelta, blending into the landscape was another line of defense, a way of avoiding confrontation altogether. The fossil of Borealopelta also revealed stomach contents, the preserved remains of its last meal. Inside were fragments of ferns, giving us a snapshot of its diet. It is rare to catch such a glimpse of prehistoric dining, rarer still in such an armored creature. It suggests that, like Ankylosaurus, Borealopelta focused on low-lying vegetation, steadily grazing rather than browsing high foliage. Its body plan, with head held low and back arched, was well suited to this quiet routine. The combination of armor and camouflage presents a fascinating paradox. Why would a creature so well defended also need to hide? The answer may lie in energy. Every fight carries risk. Even a successful defense could mean injury, infection, or exhaustion. Avoiding the fight altogether was always preferable. Borealopelta's countershading was not an admission of weakness, but a refinement of strategy. Even the most heavily armed creatures preferred peace when possible. Imagine now the Cretaceous forest. Shafts of sunlight filter through tall conifers, dappling the undergrowth in patterns of shadow and light. A Borealopelta moves slowly, its broad back blending almost perfectly with the mottled ground. A predator passes nearby, its head swinging side to side. For a moment, it pauses, nostrils flaring, but the armored giant remains still, its counter-shaded form dissolving into the play of light and shadow. The predator moves on, and Borealopelta resumes its quiet grazing, its survival assured not by violence, but by patience and invisibility. Ankylosaurs as a group remind us that evolution has many answers to the problem of survival. Some species doubled down on offense, turning tails into hammers. Others refined their armor into subtle tools of concealment. All of them chose endurance over elegance, defense over display. In contrast to the horned dinosaurs, who shouted their presence with spectacular skulls, Ankylosaurs whispered their defiance through silence and stubbornness. From a paleontological perspective, the discovery of Borealopelta also underscores the role of chance. Fossils that preserve skin, armor in place, and even pigmentation are vanishingly rare. That such the specimen survived gives us not only a glimpse into one species, but also a sense of what may have been common across many. The ankylosaurs we reconstruct in museums today, gray, heavy, inert, may in life have been patterned and textured in ways that allowed them to vanish into their environments as effectively as they withstood attack. Their legacy is one of quiet resilience. Unlike predators, whose skeletons boast of teeth and claws, ankylosaurs speak of patience, of the long game. They remind us that survival is not always about chasing or conquering. Sometimes it is about standing firm, or not being seen at all until danger passes. Picture them now. Ankylosaurus lumbering through a late Cretaceous forest, its club tail swinging gently behind. Borealopelta, patterned in dark and light, grazing unseen in the dappled shade. Both armored, both cautious, both perfectly adapted to a world where danger lurked behind every tree. In their silence, they tell us that survival is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quietest creatures who endure the longest. From the silence of armored giants, let's shift to a creature whose story began not with quiet resilience, but with mystery, one that baffled scientists for nearly half a century. It all started with a pair of arms. In 1965, in the sands of Mongolia's Gobi Desert, paleontologists uncovered fossilized forelimbs, unlike anything ever seen before. They were over 8 feet long, tipped with enormous claws, and clearly belonged to something colossal. Yet the rest of the skeleton was missing. No skull, no torso, no tail, just those titanic arms. They were given a name, Deinocheirus mirificus, the unusual, terrible hand. For decades afterward, the dinosaur was a riddle. Artists and scientists alike speculated wildly. Was it a predator, a giant raptor-like killer with claws that could gut sauropods? Was it some strange scavenger, a specialist built for tearing apart carcasses? With so little evidence, imagination filled the gaps, and Deinocheirus became one of paleontology's great enigmas. It wasn't until the early 2000s that more complete fossils began to surface, and the truth was stranger than anyone expected. Deinocheirus was no sleek predator. Instead, it turned out to be one of the oddest-looking dinosaurs ever reconstructed, a massive, humpbacked, duck-billed omnivore that defied easy classification. Fully grown, it reached lengths of over 35 feet and weighed several tons. Its body plan resembled that of the ostrich-mimic dinosaurs, the ornithomimosaurs, but supersized and modified in strange ways. Where its relatives were slender and fast, Deinocheirus was bulky, with a deep barrel chest and hips that supported a heavy frame. A ridge of elongated neural spines along its back formed a distinctive hump, possibly for storing fat, regulating heat, or supporting strong back muscles. And then there was the head. Instead of the sharp-toothed jaws that many had once imagined, Deinocheirus had a broad, flat, toothless beak. Its lower jaw flared outward, giving it a comical duck-like appearance. Inside, the surfaces bore grooves that may have helped grip slippery prey like fish, suggesting it was at least partly piscivorous. Fossilized stomach contents confirmed the picture. Remains of plants mixed with fish scales and bones. This giant was an omnivore, equally comfortable, grazing on riverside vegetation as it was scooping up aquatic creatures. Its famous arms, once imagined as killing tools, proved to be something else entirely. Though still enormous, they ended in blunt claws that seemed better suited for digging or pulling vegetation than for slashing. Some paleontologists think Deinocheirus used them to rake aquatic plants toward its mouth, or perhaps to excavate roots. The claws might also have been used defensively, swung in wide arcs, to deter predators. Even without sharp edges, the sheer size and strength of those arms would have made them formidable. The environment it inhabited was a wetland paradise of the late Cretaceous, filled with rivers, floodplains, and an abundance of fish. Deinocheirus seems to have lived much like a giant, awkward waterfowl. Picture it wading knee-deep in a river channel, massive arms spreading through the reeds, scooping clumps of vegetation while snapping up fish that darted too close. Its wide, flat feet would have helped it balance on muddy banks, and its long tail may have added stability. The discovery of Deinocheirus also carried a story of scientific detective work. For years, critical fossil material had been smuggled out of Mongolia and ended up in private collections, while other parts of the skeleton remained in museum storage. It was only when scientists managed to reunite these scattered pieces that the full picture emerged. What had once been just a pair of arms transformed into a complete and utterly unexpected dinosaur. Deinocheirus reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. What looked like the hands of a monster belonged to a lumbering omnivore that spent much of its time foraging peacefully in riversides and wetlands. And yet, it was no harmless pushover. At its size, with its massive bulk and powerful arms, even the apex predators of its day would have thought twice before challenging it. Imagine now that riverside scene in its full detail. The air hums with insects. Water glitters between patches of reeds. A shadow moves, and out steps Deinocheirus. Its humpbacked silhouette looms against the horizon. The broad beak dips into the water with a splash, rising with weeds and wriggling fish tangled together. The arms stretch outward, claws dragging plants toward the mouth. For a moment, it raises its head, water streaming from its jaws, and the sunlight catches the strange shape of its back. It is neither bird nor reptile, neither herbivore nor carnivore, but something in between, an evolutionary experiment that succeeded by ignoring categories and simply making the most of what its world offered. Styracosaurus, with its sunburst of frill spikes, was a member of the centrosaurine branch of ceratopsians. At around 18 feet long and several tons in weight, it was impressive enough simply in bulk, but its headgear transformed it into something unforgettable. The nasal horn, projecting upward, combined with the long spikes of the frill to create a silhouette that must have dominated any landscape it entered. Why such elaborate ornamentation? Fossil evidence gives us clues. Some Styracosaurus skulls bear healed wounds, suggesting that individuals engaged in head-to-head combat. Males may have locked horns or pushed frills against one another, much as deer do today with their antlers. These contests could have established dominance or secured mates. The spikes of the frill, flaring outward, may have accentuated head movements, making displays even more dramatic. Imagine two males facing off, circling, dipping their heads, the spikes gleaming in the sun. To rivals, the message was clear. To potential mates, the spectacle must have been irresistible. But display was only part of the story. Those spikes could still serve as deterrents to predators. While a tyrannosaur might still overpower a single Styracosaurus, a herd standing together, frills raised and horns forward, would have presented a wall of bone that no predator would take lightly. And unlike Ankylosaurus, which relied on armor and clubs, Styracosaurus added motion and spectacle to its defense. Its frill was a canvas, likely bright with blood-rich skin, perhaps flushed with color during mating season or moments of alarm. These were animals that communicated as much with appearance as with action. Styracosaurus also played a role in one of evolution's great experiments, geographic isolation. During the late Cretaceous, North America was split by a vast inland sea. To the north, populations of ceratopsians, like Styracosaurus, developed their own distinctive headgear. To the south, species like Cosmoceratops evolved entirely different ornaments. Each region became a stage for evolutionary creativity, as if nature itself were sculpting different masks for the same role. The result was a dazzling array of horns and frills, each variation telling a story of local pressures and social preferences. In daily life, though, Styracosaurus was a grazer. Its beak cropped low plants, its dental batteries sliced through vegetation with relentless efficiency. Herds would have moved slowly across plains and valleys, reshaping the landscape through their appetites. Behind the drama of their skulls was the steady, unromantic work of eating, day after day, year after year. And yet, their presence reshaped entire ecosystems. Predators followed them. Plants evolved under their grazing pressure, and their bones enriched the soil when they fell. Picture one last scene, a herd of Styracosaurus at dawn. The air is cool, mist clinging to the ground. Adults graze quietly, the spikes of their frills rising above the ferns like strange prehistoric sunflowers. A juvenile raises its head, imitating the posture of its elders. Off in the distance, the silhouette of a tyrannosaur moves slowly along the ridge. The herd shifts, heads lifting in unison, frills flaring as the spikes catch the morning light. No sound is made, but the message carries across the plain. Here we are, ready, together. The predator hesitates, then turns away. The herd returns to grazing, their silent communication enough to hold danger at bay. The story of armored dinosaurs often conjures images of lumbering tanks, bristling with spikes and plates, trudging through ancient forests while predators think twice before daring to strike. Yet Borealopelta, one of the most extraordinary ankylosaurs ever found, tells us that even a creature armored like a medieval knight still had reason to hide. The fossil of Borealopelta, preserved with such uncanny detail that scientists can still trace the pigments of its skin, shows that this Cretaceous juggernaut wasn't just wrapped in bone and spikes. It was also cloaked in camouflage. Its body carried patterns of countershading, darker on the top, lighter on the underside, the same strategy modern deer, antelope, and even sharks use to confuse the eye and break up their outline. For an animal the size of a car and covered in armor, the need for camouflage is startling. It suggests a world where even the best defended herbivores lived with constant threat hanging over them, where heavy armor alone was not enough. Picture the scene. A low tank-like shape moving steadily through a northern forest, the air thick with ferns and cycads, the canopy filtering shafts of light onto mottled ground. From a distance, Borealopelta's coloration would have blended it into this dappled world. Up close, its shoulders bristled with massive spikes, angled outward like lances ready to repel any predator reckless enough to charge. Between the armor plates, the skin was pebbled, thick and resilient, offering another layer of defense. The tail lacked the great bony club seen in some ankylosaurs, but it was still muscular, capable of swinging a punishing blow. In life, this dinosaur was a fortress disguised as foliage. Its lifestyle was one of deliberate browsing, with its head carried low to the ground and a wide, beak-like mouth. It could strip leaves, stems, and shoots with quiet efficiency. Behind that beak, batteries of leaf-shaped teeth would have ground down fibrous plants, while its vast gut fermented the tough material, extracting every possible calorie. It lived slowly, but it lived well, a master of patience, built for the long haul. The forest around it was not static, though. Lurking in the same ecosystem were predators like Acrocanthosaurus, a carnivore large enough to rival even Tyrannosaurus in bulk and power. For Borealopelta, camouflage and armor together meant a better chance of avoiding those killers entirely and surviving if avoidance failed. The way Borealopelta was preserved adds an almost cinematic twist to its story. Sometime after its death, the body found its way into a river and was carried far out to sea. Instead of being torn apart by scavengers, it sank into mineral-rich mud, where it was entombed so rapidly and thoroughly that even skin and pigment traces endured. When miners uncovered it millions of years later in Alberta, it was as though time had stopped. Here was not a skeleton, but a creature seemingly paused mid-stride, armor intact, skin texture visible, the shadow of its living self still etched into stone. Rarely does the fossil record grant us such a clear view into prehistory. To walk around Borealopelta in its own time would have been to see a contradiction brought to life. On one hand, it looked unassailable, a four-legged citadel with flanks of iron. On the other, it lived with the quiet knowledge that even it could fall. Camouflage says as much. Predators were always watching, and no creature, no matter how well defended, could ever truly relax. The balance of life in the Cretaceous was constant tension. Eat enough to fuel your bulk, but never let down your guard. Armor when seen, invisibility when not. A redundancy, yes, but in nature redundancy can mean survival. From the armored shadows of Borealopelta, the narrative of survival swings to something stranger, something that baffled paleontologists for decades. An animal whose story began with a pair of arms so massive and grotesque that no one could agree on what sort of beast they belonged to. The arms were discovered in the Gobi Desert in the 1960s, each over 2 meters long, ending in claws the size of steak knives. They were given the name Deinocheirus, terrible hand, and for nearly half a century that was all the world knew. Just arms, no body, no skull, no context. Imagination filled the gaps. Some pictured a predator even larger than Tyrannosaurus, wielding those claws like swords. Others thought it a scavenger, lumbering across the Cretaceous wetlands. The truth, when it finally emerged, turned out to be stranger than all the guesses. In the early 2000s, new discoveries in Mongolia began to reveal the rest of the skeleton. Piece by piece, Deinocheirus returned from obscurity, and what scientists found was an animal that seemed stitched together from parts of many dinosaurs. Yes, it had those enormous arms, heavy-boned and muscled, but the claws were blunt, not slashing weapons. It had a duck-billed skull, wide and toothless, as if borrowed from a hadrosaur. Its back bore towering spines that created a hump or sail over its shoulders, and its bulk was immense, over 11 meters long and weighing several tons. Far from a sleek hunter, Deinocheirus was a riverbank giant, a slow-moving omnivore with a silhouette like no other. Imagine it, a hulking figure wading through a Cretaceous floodplain, its broad beak skimming aquatic plants from the water's edge. The long arms sweep vegetation toward its mouth, or rake through mud for roots and small creatures. Occasionally, it snaps up fish, confirmed by fossilized stomach contents. Its world was one of sprawling rivers and wetlands, where the boundaries between land and water blurred. Other dinosaurs fed on plants or preyed on each other on solid ground. Deinocheirus chose the margins, thriving in a semi-aquatic lifestyle that let it avoid direct competition. Its famous arms, once thought to be killing tools, instead became gathering tools, rakes, hooks, shovels for pulling food closer. Muscles would have swelled across its shoulders, giving it the strength to shift vegetation or dig into riverbanks. Those blunt claws may even have been deterrents. No predator would risk grappling with such weapons. And yet, Deinocheirus was no apex killer. It was a browser, a forager, a river giant that found success in oddity. The hump on its back remains debated. Long neural spines rose like scaffolding from its vertebrae. They may have supported a fatty hump, storing energy like a camel, or a display structure, marking individuals with striking silhouettes across the floodplains. Perhaps it served thermal regulation, catching sun to warm the bulk of its body or releasing heat in the evenings. Whatever the reason, it gave Deinocheirus a profile unlike any other creature of its age. And then there is its size. In life, it stood higher than a human even at the hip, and when it raised its head, it would have towered. For Tarbosaurus, the tyrant of its region, an adult Deinocheirus was not an easy target. Its bulk, its reach, its sheer presence would have discouraged all but the boldest attacks. Juveniles may have been vulnerable, but full-grown adults likely lived with a certain security. Not invulnerability, but enough that they could move slowly, wade deliberately, and focus on feeding rather than constant flight. The rediscovery of Deinocheirus, the reuniting of those terrible arms with the rest of the skeleton, was more than just a paleontological triumph. It was a reminder that the fossil record can play tricks. For decades, a fragment suggested a monster. The whole revealed something far stranger. An omnivore, semi-aquatic, humped and duck-billed, part of a lineage usually known for fleet, bird-like runners, but here transformed into a river giant. Standing in its presence, the impression would not have been terror, but awe. The long arms swaying, the beak sweeping low, the hump rising against the horizon. It was not fast, not ferocious, not elegant, but it was singular. Proof that evolution experiments boldly, and that sometimes the most bizarre blueprints are the ones that endure. The forests and floodplains of the late Jurassic were alive with giants, but not all of prehistory's stories belonged to the towering or the heavily armored. Sometimes the most fascinating tales are told by the small and quick, those who survived by darting through the shadows, seizing opportunities that the bulkier rulers of their time overlooked. If the armored titans were fortresses on legs, then Compsognathus was the fleet-footed rogue, a reminder that in the Mesozoic world, power came in many forms. Compsognathus was never meant to dominate by size. Barely a meter long in most specimens, it was closer to a turkey or a large chicken than to the hulking predators it shared its world with. But scale is a poor measure of significance. Its skeleton revealed the precision of an athlete. Long hind limbs for rapid acceleration, a stiff balancing tail for counterweight, and a narrow skull lined with sharp little teeth that were perfect for snapping shut on small prey. It was a dinosaur designed not for spectacle, but for efficiency. To see it running through the Jurassic underbrush would have been to watch speed itself given form. Its hunting habits can be pieced together not just from bone, but from rare and remarkable glimpses of fossilized meals. In one famous specimen, the skeleton of a small lizard was preserved in its belly, so perfectly encased in stone that even the outline of the lizard's tiny bones remained visible. That moment of predation, frozen for 150 million years, speaks more eloquently than any reconstruction. Compsognathus was a predator in miniature, a hunter whose world was defined not by titanic clashes with sauropods or armored herbivores, but by the chase of scurrying reptiles, insects, and perhaps even amphibians in the shadows of the giants. It lived in an environment where danger loomed constantly. Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus prowled as apex hunters, their thunderous steps shaking the earth. But for Compsognathus, survival came not from standing against them, but from living in spaces they could not easily reach. It could slip through ferns, vanish into brush, or dart into crevices. Where a 10-ton predator demanded open ground to maneuver, Compsognathus needed only a narrow path between rocks. Its entire existence was one of agility and alertness, the perpetual balancing act of a creature that knew it could never win in a contest of strength, but could thrive if it stayed fast, quiet, and unseen. Its legacy in science is just as significant as its life in the Jurassic. In the 19th century, Compsognathus was among the first nearly complete dinosaur skeletons ever unearthed. At the time, dinosaurs were still imagined as sluggish, tail-dragging reptiles, lumbering through swamps with little grace. Compsognathus shattered that picture. With its long, slender legs and bird-like proportions, it looked agile, nimble, alive with possibility. To the scientists of that era, it was a revelation, proof that dinosaurs could be quick and active, perhaps even ancestral to the birds we see today. That bird-like link is more than coincidence. Its lightweight frame, three-toed feet, and long arms hinted at the evolutionary bridge that connected dinosaurs to the first true birds. In the forests where Compsognathus hunted, early avians, like Archaeopteryx, flitted from branch to branch. To imagine the two crossing paths, one darting along the ground, the other fluttering overhead, is to glimpse evolution in motion, cousins exploring different routes toward survival. And yet, for all its grace, Compsognathus was not invulnerable. It was as much prey as predator, always a heartbeat away from danger. Perhaps that is why it feels so relatable to us. Unlike the monstrous giants, whose lives we can barely fathom, Compsognathus lived in constant tension, seizing opportunity where it could, dodging threats where it must. It was not invincible, but it was clever enough, quick enough, resilient enough to carve out its own quiet empire in the shadows. In that, it echoes the small survivors of every age, the ones who endure not by towering over the rest, but by slipping between their feet. If Compsognathus showed that small size could be a strength, Psittacosaurus demonstrated how creativity and adaptation could flourish in unexpected forms. Its very name, parrot lizard, captures its most striking feature, a sharp, curved beak that looked startlingly like the hooked bills of modern parrots. Imagine a creature no larger than a medium-sized dog, trotting through the Cretaceous undergrowth with a parrot's face, a dinosaur's body, and a tail unlike anything else in its family. Psittacosaurus was an early member of the Ceratopsian lineage, the same branch of the dinosaur family tree that would one day produce horned giants like Triceratops and Styracosaurus. But it lived millions of years before those titans, and it bore little resemblance to them. Instead of massive frills and horns, Psittacosaurus was small and lightly built, more suited to darting through forests than to standing its ground. Its beak, sharp and efficient, clipped through tough vegetation with ease, while rows of leaf-shaped teeth behind it shredded plant matter for digestion. It was a creature perfectly suited for a life of steady foraging. The fossils of Psittacosaurus tell an unusually vivid story. Hundreds of specimens have been discovered across Asia, making it one of the best-known dinosaurs of all time. Some are preserved with skin impressions, showing scales, patterns, and even pigmentation. Others capture the delicate outlines of those tail bristles. In some cases, juvenile psittacosaurs have been found together, suggesting that they may have lived in family groups or small herds. The young had proportionally longer legs, built for speed, while the adults carried the bulkier frames of steady grazers. It paints a picture of a social animal, one whose life may have been woven with the rhythms of group living and the subtle dynamics of parental care. One particularly famous fossil preserves not just the bones and bristles, but the remnants of color itself. Analysis of pigment structures suggests Psittacosaurus may have been countershaded, with a darker back and lighter belly. This pattern is common in modern animals, from deer to fish. It helps to camouflage against predators by breaking up the body's outline. In the dappled light of a Cretaceous forest, such coloration would have been highly effective. Imagine one crouching low in the ferns, its back blending into the shadows, while its belly matched the brighter light filtering through the leaves. An Acrocanthosaurus could pass within meters and never notice. To see a Psittacosaurus in life is to glimpse both the roots of a lineage and the sparks of innovation. The horns and frills of its descendants had not yet evolved, but already the family was experimenting with display, with ornamentation, with the use of form to communicate as much as to feed. The quilled tail, the parrot's beak, the dappled colors, all of these were tools as much as traits, woven into the daily struggle to survive and to attract mates. In many ways, Psittacosaurus was a quiet herald of things to come, showing that even small dinosaurs could carry the seeds of grandeur. Where Psittacosaurus thrived in warmth and forests, Cryolophosaurus carved out its kingdom at the edge of the world. Its name means frozen crested lizard, and while Antarctica during the early Jurassic was not the frozen desert we know today, it was still a land of extremes. Long, dark winters pressed against months of endless light, and the sun hung low in the sky, even at noon. Here, in these polar forests of conifers, cycads, and tree ferns, Cryolophosaurus hunted. The crest was too fragile for combat. It was not armor, not weapon, not shield. Its purpose was almost certainly social, a structure for display, for recognition, for communication. Perhaps males with larger or more brightly colored crests were more attractive to females. Perhaps the crest allowed individuals to signal dominance without the need for constant fighting. In the dim light of polar dawn, such a crest might have caught the glow of the sun and flashed it back like a beacon, a silent signal across the snow-dusted forests. Life in Antarctica demanded resilience. Though the climate was warmer than today, frost and snow were likely part of the seasonal rhythm. Prey was not always abundant, and Cryolophosaurus had to be opportunistic. Its serrated teeth and strong jaws suggest it hunted herbivorous dinosaurs such as Glacialosaurus, a long-necked burly sauropodomorph, as well as smaller reptiles, and perhaps even early mammals. When food was scarce, it may have scavenged carcasses, its keen sense of smell leading it across the cold forests to a meal already claimed by death. Its environment must have been both haunting and beautiful. Imagine vast stands of evergreens stretching across rolling hills, the sun low and red on the horizon even at midday. Herds of small plant eaters move cautiously among the ferns, their eyes wide, their movements quick. And then, from the shadows, Cryolophosaurus steps forward. Its crest silhouetted against the slanting light, the embodiment of survival in a place where the margins were thin and the seasons unforgiving. Its discovery in the 1990s was groundbreaking, not just for its unique crest, but because it was the first large-bodied dinosaur found in Antarctica. It proved that even in polar regions, life flourished during the Age of Dinosaurs, adapting to conditions that would challenge even modern animals. The fossil record from such places is fragmentary, but each find deepens our understanding of how resilient and adaptable these creatures truly were. Cryolophosaurus, Psittacosaurus, and Compsognathus could not have been more different in form or lifestyle. One hunted in polar forests, marked by a flamboyant crest. One foraged in Asian woodlands, bristling its tail like a prehistoric porcupine. One darted through Jurassic underbrush, sharp-eyed and fleet-footed. Yet all three remind us of the same truth. Dinosaurs were not a monolithic parade of giants. They were diverse, adaptive, and endlessly inventive. They filled every niche available, from the canopy to the undergrowth, from the tropics to the poles. And as their bones whisper across millions of years, we see not just creatures of tooth and claw, but innovators, survivors, and experimenters. The small hunter, the bristle-tailed grazer, the crested polar predator. Each tells us that evolution is never one story, but countless stories unfolding at once, each as strange and spectacular as the last. And in that recognition lies the real beauty of paleontology, the understanding that life is not bound by our imagination, and that what seems impossible may simply be undiscovered. The Earth has always been stranger than we think, and it will always be stranger still. So, from the lazy scientist, good night.